The cabin smelled of rain-soaked timber and lingering smoke from the fire that had died out hours ago. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on my knees, still gripping the weight of my revolver holstered at my hip. The storm outside cracked against the wooden walls, lightning flaring through the square window and giving me quick glimpses of her dark eyes that held something wild, untamed, and unreadable. The Apache woman stood before me, her skin bronzed and scarred by both survival and battle, her hair damp and falling down her back like the storm's own shadows. Her voice had been soft but edged with certainty when she asked, "Are we alone in your cabin?" It wasn't simply a question. It was a test, a gauge of trust, of safety. "Yes," I answered, my throat dry. She turned, her eyes measuring mine, as though she could tell if my word was as steady as the land beneath us. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the sigh of wind through the cracks in the walls. Then, slowly, she reached for the ties of her buckskin dress. My breath caught as leather loosened and fell away, revealing a body etched with markings of her people. Tattoos, beads, scars that weren't shame but proof of battles endured. I didn't move. My hands twitched, aching to reach for her but anchored by hesitation. She wasn't doing this for me, not entirely. I could feel it. Her actions carried a weight, an unspoken purpose, something layered deeper than desire. "You saved me," she said at last, her voice low, carrying both gratitude and warning. "You killed 2 of them, when they would have taken me back in chains. I will not forget this. But you must understand, when I give myself, it is not surrender. It is fire." Her eyes locked with mine as she stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the rough wooden floor. She smelled of earth and rain, her presence filling the cabin more than the storm ever could. I had spent years in these plains, years staring down barrels, years chasing shadows of gold and blood, but never had I felt so undone as in that moment. She came to stand before me, and the world outside, the thunder, the wars, the debts, fell away. My hand rose almost without thought, brushing across her arm where a leather band encircled it, carved with turquoise stones. Her skin was warm, alive, carrying the pulse of something older than me, older than the cabin, older than this very land. Her lips curved, not in a smile but in a recognition of power shifting. She had stripped away the barriers not only of cloth but of distance, daring me to see her as more than a woman rescued, more than a fleeting shadow in the storm. "Do you fear me?" she asked. "No," I whispered, though I wasn't certain. She leaned closer, her breath warm on my ear. "You should." Her words weren't a threat, they were a promise. My pulse hammered, and when her hand came to rest against my chest, I realized she could feel it too. The tension was thick, not born of hesitation but of inevitability. She was claiming something. Not just shelter, not just warmth, but space inside the man I was, a place I had never willingly given anyone. Her dress lay forgotten on the floor, a circle of tattered leather and fringe that smelled faintly of smoke and sage. She pressed me back onto the bed, her dark hair cascading over me as the storm rattled the windows. And in that moment, the weight of the world was not on my shoulders. There was no past, no future, only the thunder, the rain, and the fire between us. But as her body settled against mine, I caught it, the flash of something haunted in her gaze. She wasn't simply taking me into her world, she was trying to carve out a piece of herself before it was lost. "Why did you ask if we were alone?" I murmured, my hand sliding across her back, feeling the tension in her muscles like coiled rope. She went still. The silence returned, more dangerous than before. Then she whispered, "Because if we are not, they will kill you for touching me." The words hit harder than the storm. My blood chilled, but her body stayed pressed to mine, warm and alive. She wasn't afraid, she was resigned. Somewhere out there, shadows of her people, or perhaps enemies who hunted her, were waiting. This night was stolen, fragile, dangerous. And as lightning lit the cabin once more, I realized something I hadn't before. This was not just desire, not just survival. It was defiance. She wasn't asking permission. She was claiming her freedom in the only way she knew, and I, whether I wished it or not, was part of that rebellion. I could feel her heartbeat against mine, fierce and unyielding, as she whispered again, this time not in English but in her tongue, a prayer or perhaps a curse. And though I didn't understand the words, I felt their meaning seep into my bones. Whatever this was, it would change me. It already had. Her body remained close to mine, the heat of her skin grounding me in that small cabin, but the echo of her words haunted me as much as the storm rattling outside. Because if we are not, they will kill you for touching me. That wasn't just a warning. It was a truth spoken from scars I couldn't see but could feel in the weight of her silence. I held her tighter, as if to defy whatever ghosts lingered beyond those log walls, as if to tell her that for tonight, neither of us belonged to anyone but ourselves. Her lips hovered inches above mine before she pressed them down with a force that felt more like an oath than a kiss. Her mouth tasted of rain and smoke, of wild herbs carried in the wind, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was breathing her in or losing my breath entirely. Her hands found their way along my chest, tracing lines of muscle, scars, and bone, as if memorizing me. She wasn't gentle, not like the women in the towns I had known. She was fierce, insistent, claiming every inch of me as though she were fighting time itself. The storm outside built like a drum, steady and deep, shaking the earth beneath us, and with each crack of thunder I felt her move against me with more certainty. Her body was both refuge and battleground, soft in its giving yet unyielding in spirit. I let go of the world then, forgot about debts, blood feuds, the weight of a revolver that had been my only companion for too long. There was only her, a flame in the dark, consuming me whole. When finally her breath came in ragged gasps and her body trembled against mine, she collapsed to my chest, her hair damp and tangled across my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a drifter caught between past sins and future dangers. I felt anchored by her heartbeat against my ribs. But anchors weigh a man down, and I knew better than to mistake this night for safety. After a long silence, she lifted her head, eyes searching mine. There was no tenderness there, no promises of forever, just a quiet acceptance, as though she had known from the start that this fire would burn itself out come dawn. You do not understand what you have done, she whispered, her hand brushing across my chest once more. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but her gaze silenced me. There was a burden there, one older than either of us, written not in words but in the hard lines of her face and the unflinching certainty of her stare. Instead, I asked, "What's your name?" Her lips curved, but not into a smile. Names are not gifts given lightly. But tonight, you may call me Ahioka. The name settled between us like a stone dropped in still water. It carried weight, carried history. I said it, under my breath, as if to make it real, and she looked at me with something that was almost softness. You are not like other men, she said. That's not always a good thing, I muttered. No, she agreed, it is not. She slid off me then, rising to her feet with the grace of a huntress, her body a silhouette against the window where lightning flared once more. She bent to retrieve the leather fringe of her dress but didn't put it back on. Instead, she lifted it, ran her fingers along the worn seams, and then let it drop again to the floor. She stood as if daring the night itself to look in on us. I sat up, still watching her, struck by the strange mix of vulnerability and defiance that seemed to live in every movement she made. She turned back to me finally, eyes sharp again. They will come for me, she said. And if they find me here, they will kill you first. Not because of who you are, but because of what you have touched. I opened my mouth to speak, but she raised a hand, silencing me. You do not know the old laws. To them, I am not simply a woman. I am a piece of something they claim as theirs. You have broken that claim. Something in her voice told me this wasn't mere superstition. It was blood deep, tribal, ancient. My jaw tightened. I had faced bounty hunters, gunslingers, and mercenaries with nothing but 6 bullets in my nerve. But this was different. This was a fight that started long before I ever crossed her path. Still, I said, let them come. Her eyes narrowed. You think courage is enough. You think your gun is enough. No, they are shadows in the dark. They will wait for you to close your eyes, for you to take breath in safety. And then they will strike. I stood, crossing the room toward her. She didn't step back. We stood face to face, close enough that I could see the stormlight glinting off the small turquoise stones woven into her armbands. I reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. Then let them strike, I said. Because I won't hand you over. For the first time, her face cracked, not into a smile, not into fear, but into something torn between disbelief and an ache she didn't want to name. "You are a fool," she whispered. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm your fool tonight." Her laugh was sharp, quick, and gone just as fast. She turned from me and sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket across her shoulders though her body seemed made for the storm. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a long while. The storm passed eventually, fading into a gentle patter of rain that softened against the cabin walls. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the heavy kind, the kind that makes a man listen harder for what might be lurking just beyond. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and though I wanted to believe it was comfort, I knew better. It was weariness. It was the pause before the next strike. Sleep came to me in pieces, broken by dreams I couldn't hold on to. When I finally woke, the fire had burned to ash and the light through the window told me it was dawn. My hand instinctively went to my side where my revolver rested, but what struck me harder was the emptiness beside me. The blanket was folded neatly, her scent still lingering there, but she was gone. I rose quick, scanning the cabin, my heart pounding like the storm had returned. The door stood slightly open, and beyond it, the world was wet and silver with morning rain. I stepped outside, revolver in hand, but there was no sign of her, only the tracks in the mud, bare footprints that led away from the cabin and into the trees. I cursed under my breath, part of me wanting to chase her, part of me knowing that chasing an Apache woman in her own land was suicide. She had left not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Still, I couldn't shake the echo of her words, the look in her eyes, the fire of her body against mine. She had left something behind inside me, something I couldn't name. And I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that this wasn't the end. Because in the silence of dawn, carried faint on the wet wind, I thought I heard it. The snap of a twig, the shift of bodies in the underbrush. We were not alone anymore. And somewhere, not far from that cabin, Ahioka was being hunted. Or maybe she was hunting. Either way, I was already part of it. The blanket still smelled like her. Smoke, rain, and something wild I couldn't put into words clung to the fabric, and though my hand gripped the revolver at my side, my mind couldn't shake the hollow ache of her absence. She had left before the sun had burned through the clouds, moving as silently as only someone born of this land could. But the footprints in the mud told me what she hadn't. The world hadn't given her a choice. I stepped out of the cabin, the door creaking against the damp air, and scanned the tree line. The forest dripped with last night's rain, branches sagging low, and every drop that hit the leaves seemed louder than my own heartbeat. Her tracks were clear at first, bare feet pressing into soft earth, moving with urgency but not fear. She wasn't running, not yet. But then the trail broke, swallowed by thicker brush, and something else caught my eye. The sharper imprints of boots, several of them, cutting across her path. My chest tightened. She hadn't lied. We weren't alone anymore. I crouched low, fingers brushing the prints, my other hand steady on the revolver at my hip. There were at least 3 men, maybe more, judging by the spacing and depth. Hunters, maybe bounty men, maybe soldiers, maybe worse. Whoever they were following her. And if they caught her, the best I could hope was that they'd kill her quickly. I rose, cursing under my breath. She had left me behind to spare me, thinking I wouldn't follow. But she didn't know I'd already made my choice the moment she stepped into that cabin. The woods swallowed me as I followed the trail, moving slow, careful. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of wet earth and pine. Every sound carried. Birds scattering, the distant crack of branches, the faint hum of insects. I kept low, eyes scanning for signs. A bent twig, a disturbed fern, the glint of boot nails in mud. Hours stretched thin, the sun rising higher, until at last I heard voices. I froze, crouching behind a fallen log slick with moss. Up ahead, in a clearing where the trees thinned, I saw them. 4 men, armed with rifles and knives, moving with the rough carelessness of those who believed the land belonged to them. Their coats were patched, hats low, faces shadowed by stubble and hunger. One of them carried a length of rope coiled over his shoulder. Another had feathers tied to his belt, trophies. My gut churned. They weren't hunting her to return her. They were hunting her for sport. I scanned for her, but she wasn't with them. Relief and dread warred inside me. That meant she was still free. but for how long? One of the men stopped, squatting low to the ground. He touched the earth, then grinned. "She's close," he said, his voice carrying in the damp air. "Tracks are fresh." My grip on the revolver tightened. 4 men against me wasn't the worst odds I'd seen, but firing now would bring the forest alive with gunfire, and she might not get the chance to run. I had to be careful. I had to be smart. As they moved on, I shadowed them, keeping to the trees, my boots barely touching the ground. They weren't skilled trackers. They were brutes following signs any fool could read. That gave her an edge, but not enough. Not with 4 against 1. The trail wound uphill, rocks slick with moss, and then I saw it. A flicker of movement, a shadow slipping between trees above the hunters. My heart surged. Ahioka. She was crouched low, bow in hand, an arrow nocked and ready. She moved like a whisper, every muscle coiled, eyes fixed on the men below her. She hadn't run. She had set a trap. The first arrow struck before I could even draw breath. It sank into the shoulder of the man with the rope, and he staggered back with a howl, crashing against a tree. The others spun, rifles raised, but she was gone, vanished into the brush. "Spread out," one of them barked. "She's up there." They scrambled up the slope, cursing, crashing through the undergrowth. I moved quick, circling wide, keeping myself unseen. Shots cracked, echoing through the trees, splintering bark, but none hit true. She was too fast, too quiet. She loosed another arrow, and another man went down, screaming as blood bloomed against his chest. But the noise drew them tighter. They'd corner her soon. I broke cover then, revolver in hand, and fired. The shot rang like thunder, dropping the man closest to her hiding spot. His body spun and crumpled to the ground. The others wheeled, eyes wide, suddenly realizing the prey had doubled. Ahioka emerged from the trees, her bow lowered, eyes locking with mine across the clearing. For a heartbeat, time stopped. She hadn't expected me. She hadn't wanted me here. But the fire in her gaze wasn't anger, it was something fiercer. Something like hope. The last man raised his rifle, aiming not at her but at me. I dove, rolling hard into the mud as the shot tore through the air, close enough to sing past my ear. My revolver barked back, and the man dropped, his rifle clattering beside him. Silence returned, broken only by the groans of the dying and the drip of rain from the canopy. Smoke curled from my revolver's barrel, stinging my eyes. My chest heaved, breath ragged, but my hand stayed steady. I scanned, waiting for more, but none came. Then she was there, standing over me, her bow lowered, her hair plastered to her face with sweat and rain. She looked down, her expression unreadable. "You were a fool," she said again, her voice low. "Maybe," I muttered, pushing myself to my feet. "But I'm still alive." She studied me, then glanced at the bodies around us. Her jaw tightened. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel her breath, her hand brushing against mine before she pulled it away. "You should not have followed me," she said. "They will not stop. These were only the first." "I don't care," I said. Her eyes flared, the fire in them brighter than the storm had been. "You will." We moved then, quick and silent, deeper into the woods. She led this time, and I followed, not because I had no choice but because I trusted her feet more than mine in this land. Hours passed as the sun climbed high, then dipped low again. We spoke little, only when the silence grew too heavy. That night we camped in a hollow where the trees bent low, a small fire hidden by stone and shadow. She sat across from me, legs folded, sharpening an arrowhead with a piece of flint. The firelight danced across her skin, painting her in gold and shadow. "Why did they hunt you?" I asked finally. Her hand stilled, the flint pausing against the arrowhead. She looked at me across the fire, and for a long time I thought she might not answer. Then she said, "Because I belong to no one. And that is something they cannot forgive." I frowned. "Belong?" She nodded once, sharply. "A daughter of my people is expected to be traded, promised, bound." I refused. I walked away. I took what was mine, myself. "That is the crime." Her voice didn't waver, but the fire in her eyes was the same fire that had burned in the cabin. Fierce, untamed. "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, sliding the arrow into her quiver, "I run. Or I fight." until there is nothing left. Her words settled heavy between us. I wanted to tell her she wasn't alone, not anymore. But I knew words were empty things compared to the weight of blood and survival. So instead I reached across the fire, my hand resting on hers for just a moment. She didn't pull away. The night deepened, the stars hidden behind heavy clouds. I lay on the ground, my revolver close, my body aching from the day's fight. Sleep came in fits, broken by the crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind through branches. And once, when I woke and glanced across the flames, I saw her watching me, eyes dark and endless, like the storm before it breaks. I closed my eyes again, knowing that whatever tomorrow brought, more hunters, more blood, more fire, I had already chosen my path. And it was with her, even if it burned me alive. The fire had burned low, just embers casting a dull orange glow against the stones, and the forest around us was alive with distant sounds, an owl's cry, the rustle of some animal moving through underbrush, the sigh of wind threading through the canopy. I lay on my back, staring at the heavy clouds shifting across the narrow band of sky above us, my revolver resting against my palm as though even in sleep it might be needed. Across the flames, Ahioka sat cross-legged, unmoving, her gaze on the darkness beyond the hollow, her bow resting against her knees. I wondered if she ever slept at all. She looked carved from the earth itself, as though her spirit refused rest while shadows prowled. But every so often, her eyes flicked to me, quick as a sparrow, and each time I caught it I felt the same strange weight in my chest. When the fire crackled louder, I pushed myself up, leaning on an elbow. "You'll burn yourself out if you don't close your eyes sometime," I murmured. She didn't answer right away, and for a moment I thought she'd ignore me. Then she said, "When I sleep, I see their faces. Men I killed, men I refused, and those who will never forgive me." Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something sharp-edged. "You're not the only one with ghosts," I said softly. Her gaze shifted to me, dark eyes reflecting the glow of the dying fire. "Your ghosts do not hunt you in the flesh." I held her stare, then gave a slow nod. "Not yet." That brought the faintest curl of her lips, not quite a smile, not quite mockery. She looked back to the trees. "They will come again. Those men today, they were only the first. They will not stop until I am taken or I am dead." "Then I guess I'm in it now too," I said, sitting up fully, my revolver resting across my knees. She studied me, her eyes narrowing. "You could leave. Go back to your cabin. Go back to your life. And let you face them alone." I shook my head. "Not after last night. Not after today." Her face shifted then, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her features. For a moment she looked younger, less carved by the world. Then it was gone, replaced by the same steel. She turned her gaze back to the fire, her shoulders rising and falling with a slow breath. We fell into silence again, the kind that isn't empty but full of the things we didn't say, the choices already made. When dawn came, gray and pale, the fire was long dead. The air was damp, heavy with dew, and the forest seemed too still. Ahioka rose without a word, slinging her bow across her back, checking her quiver. I followed her lead, holstering my revolver, adjusting the strap of my canteen. We moved through the trees side by side, though she was always a step ahead, her feet finding paths I couldn't see. She paused often, crouching to touch the ground, scanning the brush. Once she froze, her hand raising sharply, and I went still too, my heart pounding. She tilted her head, listening. From far off, faint but certain, came the sound of dogs. "They've set hounds on us," she said, her voice flat. "How far?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not far enough. They'll track me easily. My scent, my blood." I glanced at her, then at the woods. "Then we need to throw them off." She turned, meeting my eyes. "You know these men. If they catch me, I will not live. You understand this?" "I understand," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, then gave the smallest nod. "Then follow." What followed was a blur of movement, swift and silent. She led us along streams, wading through cold water to drown our scent, climbing rocks slick with moss, doubling back in patterns that left me dizzy. The hounds grew louder, then fainter, then loud again. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but she moved as though the forest itself carried her. At last, we came to a ravine, a narrow crack in the earth choked with brambles. She leapt down without hesitation, landing light, and I followed, stumbling, catching myself against a rock. The air down there was damp and cool, shadows thick. "This way," she whispered, pushing through a narrow cleft that led into darkness. I hesitated, my hand brushing stone slick with moisture. "What is this place?" "A place they will not follow," she said, her voice like stone itself. I ducked and followed her in. The passage narrowed, the walls closing around us until we were crawling on hands and knees. My breath echoed in my ears, the scrape of boots against rock loud in the confined space. Ahead, she moved without fear, as though she had walked this path before. The passage opened suddenly into a cavern, wide and echoing, lit faintly by shafts of light breaking through cracks high above. Stalactites dripped water into pools that gleamed like silver. The air was cool, heavy with the smell of earth. I rose to my feet, turning slow, taking it in. "How did you know this was here?" She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "Because my people hid here once, when soldiers burned our homes. The land remembers." I swallowed hard, the weight of history pressing in on me. She walked to the center of the cavern, laying her bow down, then turned to face me. "You should leave now," she said quietly. I stared at her, stunned. "After all that, you want me to walk away?" Her eyes met mine, fierce and unflinching. "Yes, you saved me, twice. You've done enough. If you stay, you will die for nothing." My jaw tightened. I crossed the cavern, closing the distance between us until I stood inches away. "Don't tell me what's worth dying for." Her breath caught, just faintly, and for the first time I saw her resolve falter. She looked away, her shoulders tense, then back at me. "You were a fool," she whispered again. "Then I guess that's who I am," I said. The silence stretched, heavy with everything we couldn't say. Then she reached out, her hand brushing against my chest, just once, before she pulled it back. Her eyes burned with something I couldn't name. "We rest here," she said. "Then we move again." We made camp in that cavern. No fire, only the dim shafts of light above. I sat against the stone, my revolver resting across my lap, while she curled near the wall, her bow close at hand. Sleep came fitfully, broken by echoes and dreams of dogs and fire. When I woke, she was gone. Panic flared, sharp and cold, but then I saw her, silhouetted against the light at the far end of the cavern, standing at the edge of another passage, her body still as stone. I rose, moving to her side. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "They are close. Too close. We must move now." We pressed on, deeper into the earth, through passages that twisted and narrowed, through chambers where water dripped like the ticking of a clock. The air grew colder, heavier. And always, behind us, faint but certain, came the sound of pursuit. At last, the passage opened again, spilling us out into daylight. We emerged on a hillside high above the forest, the valley sprawling below us, green and endless. I drew a deep breath, the air fresh and sharp after the cavern's weight. But there was no relief. Smoke rose from the trees below, campfires. Many of them. Her face hardened. "They are waiting." I stared at the smoke, at the valley crawling with shadows. My hand tightened on my revolver. "Then we don't wait for them to come to us." She turned, her eyes fierce, her hand brushing the knife at her side. "No," she said, "we take the fight to them." And for the first time, I saw not just a woman hunted, not just a flame burning against the dark. I saw a warrior ready to burn the whole forest if that's what it took. And I knew I would follow her into the fire. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the valley like the heavy breath of some unseen beast. Rain dripped from the cabin's roof, trickling down in uneven rhythms that made the silence inside almost unbearable. He sat there, his gaze locked on her as if she were both salvation and destruction in the same breath. The Apache woman stood before him, her dark hair clinging damp to her shoulders, her skin marked with scars and symbols that whispered of battles fought long before they had crossed paths. Her question, whether they were truly alone, still rang between them, though the answer had already been proven by the beating of his heart and the look in her eyes. For days they had existed in that fragile cocoon of wood and firelight, the world outside pressing against the walls but never breaching them. He found himself growing restless, for the cabin was not only shelter but a cage. Yet each time he thought of leaving, of saddling his horse and disappearing into the wide plains, he would turn and see her, silent, watchful, unafraid, and the weight of that decision crushed him back into his seat. She had become the center of his nights and the fire of his mornings, a presence so fierce he could not imagine the empty spaces without her shadow filling them. But a man's past never lies still. His enemies carried his name like a curse across the land, and her people, too, had whispers of vengeance that could not be silenced by stolen moments in a cabin. Their union, as wild and consuming as it was, stood against traditions, against tribes and towns, against everything carved into the soil by generations. Yet neither of them spoke of it, not in words. Their silence was its own vow, their touch its own declaration. One night, as the embers glowed low, she reached for him not as a stranger, not even as a woman testing fate, but as one who had already chosen. Her hands traced the calloused scars on his chest, each mark a story he had tried to forget. She pressed her lips to the places where pain had once lived, and for the first time in years, he felt those wounds lighten. He pulled her into him, not out of hunger, but with the desperation of a man who knew the world would soon come tearing at their fragile sanctuary. And yet he could not stop, even knowing that. Morning came with no mercy. Hoofbeats echoed from beyond the ridge, faint at first, then growing louder, sharper, undeniable. He moved to the window, pulling the curtain of furs aside, his body tightening like a drawn bow. She had already risen, her hand brushing the hilt of her knife as though she had been waiting for this moment all along. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. Trouble had found them. Outside, riders gathered, their silhouettes black against the gray horizon. Men of the town, bounty hunters, drifters who had heard too many tales of the outlaw holdup in the mountains. He could almost hear their laughter, their certainty that they would bring him back in chains or not at all. But what froze him was not their presence. It was her expression, the calm, steady fire in her gaze that said she had expected this long before he had dared to imagine it. "Your ghosts," she whispered, her voice carrying both warning and understanding. "And yours too," he replied. The standoff dragged through the day. The men outside shouted demands, cursed threats, even promised mercy if he surrendered. He ignored them all, his mind running through calculations, exits, chances slim to none. She, however, did not tremble. She sat sharpening her blade with slow precision, as if each scrape against the stone was a heartbeat closer to destiny. He realized then that this was not only his fight. She had chosen it as much as he had. When darkness fell, the fire inside the cabin seemed too bright, too loud, as though it might give them away. She leaned close to him, her breath brushing his ear. "They will come before dawn," she said. "When the night makes them bold." He nodded, but his chest tightened with the weight of choices. If he fought, he could die. If he surrendered, he would lose not only his freedom but her. And if they both fled into the night, there was no promise the wilderness would keep them safe. Yet when her hand slipped into his, rough and steady, the decision became clear. He would not let them take this from him. Not the cabin, not the firelight, not her. The attack came as she predicted. Shouts split the night, boots thundered against the cabin walls, and the air filled with the smell of gunpowder. He fired from the window, each shot a roar of defiance. She moved like a spirit of war, her knife flashing in the half-light, striking down the men who dared breach the door. They fought side by side, not as outlaw and captive, not as man and woman divided by race or history, but as two souls bound by something greater than the world's rules. Bodies fell, the storm of violence tearing through the cabin until silence claimed it once more. Smoke choked the air, and blood stained the wooden floor. He stood panting, his revolver empty, his arms trembling with exhaustion. She, too, bore wounds, shallow cuts across her skin, yet her eyes burned with unbroken fire. But silence was not victory. More men would come. The valley had heard the echo of gunfire, and news would spread like wildfire. He turned to her, his voice hoarse. "We can't stay. Not here. Not anymore." She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the blood on his cheek, smearing it into something almost sacred. "Then we go," she said simply. And so they did. Through the darkness, through the rivers and mountains, riding hard as if chased by the very fangs of the earth itself. Nights blurred into days, and the wilderness became their only witness. They hunted for food, built fires in hidden caves, and spoke in fragments of dreams that felt impossible yet desperately needed. He told her of a land farther west, where no lawman's reach could find them. She told him of rivers her ancestors once called holy, where no settler's boots had yet defiled the soil. Between those visions lay a promise, that if they could reach it, they could start anew. But fate is not so easily outrun. One dawn, as they crossed a ridge lined with pine, the sound of rifles cracked the still air. An ambush. The men had tracked them, patient as wolves. He was struck, a burning pain tearing through his side, and he fell from his horse. She screamed his name, leaping down, her knife already drawn, her body shielding his from the rain of bullets. She fought like the storm itself, cutting down one man after another, until even the survivors fled, leaving their dead scattered across the stones. She fell to her knees beside him, pressing her hands to his wound. Blood spilled hot against her skin, and for the first time, she trembled. His eyes met hers, filled with a sorrow that words could not carry. "Go," he whispered, "save yourself." But she shook her head fiercely, her hair whipping around her face. "I did not choose you to leave you. I will not." Her voice broke something inside him, something deeper than flesh. He reached up, his hand brushing her cheek, smearing her with his blood. "Then we'll finish this together," he said. Through her skill, her will, and the remnants of his strength, they made it farther than either believed possible. They crossed rivers swollen with rain, climbed mountains that seemed to scrape the heavens, and at last reached a valley untouched by men. There, among wildflowers and endless sky, they found a place where no one knew their names. He was weak, his wound never fully healing, but in her arms he found peace. She built a shelter from branches and stone, and when the nights grew cold, she pressed against him, her warmth keeping the darkness at bay. One evening, as the sun bled crimson across the horizon, he knew his time was short. He looked at her, memorizing every line of her face, every mark of strength written on her skin. "They'll tell stories of us," he said softly, "but they'll never know the truth." She held his hand, her tears falling silently. "Then let them tell their stories. I will carry the truth." And when his last breath left him, she buried him beneath the great oak at the heart of the valley. She carved no name, no marker, for their love had never belonged to the world. It was theirs alone, written in fire and blood, in silence and storm. And though she stood alone beneath the endless sky, she felt him still, in the wind that brushed her hair, in the rivers that sang through the valley, in the beat of her own heart that refused to break. For love such as theirs was never meant to be bound by cabins or hunted by men. It was meant to defy, to burn, to live on long after the world had forgotten the outlaws and the warriors who came before. And so it did, echoing in the wild places, eternal and unbroken, a story carried on the lips of the wind itself. Thank you so much for watching this story till the very end. Your support means more than words can ever say. If you felt the depth of this journey, don't forget to give it a like, share it with someone who needs it, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Together, we'll keep bringing powerful stories to life, and your presence here makes all the difference.